Well, first of all, I wanted to give you a quick update on what we've been doing in the last 6 months. Well, at the request of the Energy Committee, this is back in 2009, the DCISC did review the issue of embrittlement reactor pressure vessel integrity, and for the 20-year license extension before it was dropped. And we wrote a letter, actually Dr. Budnitz wrote a letter, which evaluated the situation back in 2011 on PTS and seismic events. Subject to new information, he concluded at that point that both units could operate safely for an additional 20 years. Recent interactions, however, we've had many, many meetings on this topic in reactor vessel embrittlement. As you can see, February, June, September. Mr. Severance, who has just joined us, welcome, and others have expressed concerns about the reactor Unit 1 embrittlement. And we, as a result, hired Dr. Kirk to review this. As you may know, Dr. Kirk was a former NRC staffer in the research area where his expertise was in reactor vessel embrittlement. In January 31st, we issued 2 reports by Dr. Kirk. One was a general report on reactor vessel embrittlement, and the second one was specifically addressing Unit 1 at Diablo Canyon. We made a presentation on both of his reports in February of this year. On February 29th, we requested additional comments. Hopefully by March 15th, that was be a 45-day comment period from the initial issuance of his reports. We extended the comment period to April 15th, and Mr. Severance did reply on April 15th. Ms. Kern requested extensions for Dr. McDonald, which we granted. On May 28th, we posted Dr. Kirk's comments on Mr. Severance. And on June 10th, Mr. Severance responds to Dr. Kirk's comments. And on June 14th, a few days ago, we received Dr. McDonald's comments. So we've been quite busy, as you can see. Well, Dr. Kirk's conclusions, just to remind everybody, but based on his evaluation, the calculations that PG&E did on the current reactor vessel integrity were confirmed and validated. And those were very simply, Unit 1 meets the NRC requirements for reactor vessel integrity through the 60-year period. The credibility of the data was correctly assessed. Sister plant data was correctly used. Deferrals with Capsule B were appropriate in accordance with NRC procedures, and vessel inspection schedules were appropriate, again, in accordance with NRC procedures. In terms of Capsule B, is scheduled for withdrawal in the 2025 election outage, I should say, and removal is needed by 2028, consistent with NRC guidance. When new data comes in, maybe from Capsule B in 2028, we'll have to maybe reevaluate the RPV integrity. So we also performed some supplemental analysis using his techniques and more advanced methods, and validated the pressurized thermal shock shows that it will not exceed the screening criteria for 60 years. He did look at upper shelf energy, and he did conclude that the upper shelf energy may fall below the screening criteria by 2029 or 2030. He did also say that there are absolutely more accurate techniques that can be used to justify continued operation. And as I said in my earlier comments, that for Yankee, we did that kind of analysis and showed that it was safe to operate. Now, Mr. Severance had provided his comments on, as I said, April 15th, and we characterized them in certain key areas. The A group was, were NRC procedures used correctly? And that dealt mainly with NRC credibility assessments, the use of sister plant data, that there were limited data to make evaluations, and why have embrittlement forecasts changed over that period of time. The second grouping was deferrals relative to Capsule B and what the impact would be if they had pulled them like at the appropriate time, according to Mr. Severance. And he also claimed that Capsule B should be removed since a 4th capsule is necessary for the 40-year license term. The Kirk report shows that the upper shelf energy could reach the screening limit by 2029, 2030. In response, Dr. Kirk replies that in the category grouping A, that we believe Mr. Severance continues to misunderstand how NRC evaluates embrittlement and use of their procedures. He provided additional explanations in his response, which I'm not going to go into here, and the forecast changed largely due to the use of current information, which was available in 2011. The review of the current NRC requirements and license shows that Diablo Canyon is a 3-capsule plant, not 4, and it was licensed under E-18570, which refers to exactly the 3-capsule requirement for that vintage plant. The NRC document that Mr. Severance does cite, which is a 2006 document, does not amend the Diablo Canyon license requiring the 4th sample taken in the 40-year period. Mr. Severance is correct that the supplemental upper shelf energy analysis, but it is not approved, as Dr. Kirk has stated many times, but Diablo Canyon does meet all NRC requirements. And as I said earlier, the equivalent margins analysis has shown acceptable results for other plants. Well, in summary, to Mr. Severance's first letter of April 15th, none of the concerns that he has expressed change the outcome of both of his reports. The embrittlement predictions are compliant with NRC regulations. PTS screening criteria will not be exceeded. The upper shelf energy meets the regulatory requirements of 60 years, and capsule B testing isn't required until 2028 for extended operation. So the conclusions basically are that his report still confirms the PG&E reactor vessel integrity calculations were confirmed and validated. Unit 1 meets the requirements. I'm not going to repeat all of it, but basically the plant is okay. Now, Mr. Severance wrote back in response to Dr. Kirk's comments that the challenges of NRC reviewing, he challenges the process of NRC reviewing embrittlement. He challenged that whole process. He does rely on Dr. McDonald's input, which the committee we just received, so I'll have some comments on that later. But he also challenges the use of sister plant information, and he also challenged the embrittlement assessment, even though it's not NRC approved, but it's contained in the license amendment application. So the bottom line of all that was that the 2011 report, which was not yet reviewed by the NRC, is the current data that upon which Dr. Kirk used to assess embrittlement for the reactor vessel. And he also would like some review of the equivalent full power years of operation, which we can do. So again, nothing in his latest letter changes his opinion found in parts 1 and 2 of the report. And our recommendation would be, if he challenges the NRC review process on embrittlement, including the use of sister plant data, he should address those issues with the NRC. Again, and concluding that the latest information in 2011, according to Dr. Kirk, it meets NRC's embrittlement requirements for 60 years of operation. So I would like to now maybe open for questions, discussion. That's the update on Mr. Severance's comments and the public comments that we've been able to digest so far.
Yes, Dr. Kadak, you just indicated it's our recommendation, quote unquote. Who is our?
Well, Dr. Kirk's largely, and mine together. I support his recommendation. And the consultants have also reviewed this report and Dr. Kirk's reports.
Okay. My perception has been, at the time when we retained Dr. Kirk, that under the contract, his analysis and his report is his own.
That is true.
The committee takes no ownership of that report, right?
At this point, that's correct.
Okay, so yeah. So, and that is still the case.
Yes.
Right? So what you're doing is just...
The conclusions presented were those of Dr. Kirk, reviewed by myself, Mr. Wardell, and Mr. McWhirter.
Right. Right, so you as the manager of that contract, on behalf of the committee, have now expressed your opinion
That is correct.
on how we should treat that report.
That's
Okay,
correct.
Great, great. And the committee, I'd like to say again, has yet to make a determination as to what we should do with that report.
That is correct. But at our last meeting in February, you accepted the report for your consideration.
Yes, 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 yes. Shall we entertain comments from the committee's bench? Or should we entertain comments, after that, entertain comments from members of the public? What's your preference?
I'm open to anything.
I would recommend that we proceed to get comments from the other parties.
Okay, Dr. Peterson suggests we entertain public comments now.
No, I want to suggest that with the next order of business ought to be to receive a presentation that we had arranged from Digby McDonald.
Exactly. That was the plan.
Okay, okay,
If he's
All right.
available.
I mean, in other words, after we hear Digby McDonald's
okay,
input, and then we can have a colloquy with him if we wish.
Exactly.
Then we can come back and say, what do we want to do next?
That's correct.
okay. Is Dr. McDonough available to address the committee?
That's up to our audiovisual gurus. His report has been put online, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Can you hear me?
Okay, good.
Yeah, next slide.
Yes, we hear you.
Wait,
Okay,
Wait,
here
somebody,
are some key concerns. Based
Hold
on
on.
2003 and pre-2003 data, the reactor pressure vessel on Unit 1 appears to be dangerously embrittled. Additionally, no reliable reference temperature data since 2003, no ultrasound testing since 2005. PG&E and NRC have endangered public health and safety on that issue alone. Reliance on generic and so-called integrated surveillance program data unjustified because DCPP1, it's Unit 1, and Palisades do not qualify under 10 CFR 50 Appendix H as ISP partners. Dr. Kurt's analytical methods concerning combining a combined Unit 1 and Palisades data show that the results are not credible. And I'll show you that in the graphs below. Our position is simply that Unit 1 should be closed immediately because of it's the only reasonable response to PG&E and NRC mismanagement. Next slide. As background, ASTM E18570 stipulates 5+ capsules irradiated up to the end of life. And the reason for that is that the shift in the reference temperature was predicted to be more than 200 degrees Fahrenheit due to high nickel and copper in weld 27204. That was forewarned by Westinghouse. A minimum of 5 RT-NDT versus fluence data are crucial to practical optimization of the model on the equations of RG 1.99 revision 2, 1988. Interesting, the original surveillance program comprised 8 capsules, of which 3 had the weld metal 27204 and 5 contained the base metal. And it's interesting that it's surprising that PG&E and NRC's insistence did not replace the base metal capsules with additional capsules containing weld metal so that we would have a a good body of data. The basic problem with Unit 1 is that we have too few data. Next slide. Okay, I want to point out a problem with Dr. Kirk's definition of delta T 41J, which is the reference temperature at 30 foot-pounds. The solid lines in these curves here are the hyperbolic tangent functions, which I'll describe in a few minutes. But you'll notice that the red line passes through 30 foot-pounds, and you'll notice that upon irradiation, there's a negative shift in delta T. And of course, that is simply a result of the fact that it was arbitrarily defined by ASME and uncritically adopted by NRC and PG&E. And this is a graph that I took from Eason et al., in which they point out this ridiculous situation where there's a negative shift in delta T 41J upon irradiation. On the other hand, if you were to define the shift at being at the point of inflection of this symmetric hyperbolic tangent function, you can see there's very little effect. And one of the issues here is that we're not absolutely certain what level of irradiation was applied to this sample. Next slide, please. Here's Dr. Kirk's analysis. The points marked D for Diablo Canyon. There's a generic point at minus 50 degrees centigrade. And then the first point up from that is capsule S, the capsule Y, the capsule V, and then 2 data points that were taken from Palisades. And you can see that what happens is that those data points from Palisades tend to bend down the curve. And so that the curve begins to flatten out and run parallel to the screening criterion. But the biggest problem with this graph, and I don't think it's something that NRC would sanction, is that Dr. Kirk has committed the original sin in science and engineering. He hasn't included error bars. He seems to have cherry-picked the Palisades data because he published in RG 1.99 revision 2 a supplement to that report in which he showed that there was a data point at a much higher value of RT NDT, and shown in the next slide where I include the error bars. And as you can see, if I draw a straight line through the data points with the error bars, by the way, are defined by Eason et al. And so they're not invented by me. They're actually based on hard data. And you can see the intersection occurs somewhere between about 1.2 and 2.2 to 2.4 times 10 to the 19 neutrons per centimeter squared. On the other hand, if you were to draw a line through the Palisades data that he used, the 2 data, you draw a line that is essentially parallel to the PTS screening criteria, and these curves never intersect. And so what that means is the reactor could keep operating forever without running into a problem. But he cherry-picked his data because at the top, above the PTS screening criteria, is that data marked P, which is in that supplement to RG 1.99. So our point here is that Such an analysis is invalid unless you are capable of quantifying the error bars. Next slide, please.
Hold on. Digby McDonald, this is Bob Budnitz. I just want to ask one simple question. Of the plot with the error bars. Are those intended?
I'm sorry?
Are those intended, or are they one standard deviation? I mean, in other
I'm
words,
sorry, I can't hear you.
are they 95% confidence? Are they one standard deviation? What sort of uncertainty is captured by these bars?
Yeah, the error bars are plus or minus about 25 degrees Fahrenheit on the vertical
Well,
scale.
I can see that they're plus or minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. It goes from 0 to, I mean, I can see that, but the question is, are they one standard deviation of confidence, or are they two, or are they based on some?
No,
measurement?
that's roughly the standard deviation.
Say it again. It's one standard deviation?
Right, one
Well,
standard
how
deviation.
in the world is the same plus or minus 25, or whatever it looks, roughly, the same error bar for all those points? And secondly,
Okay.
the one in the lower left-hand corner has,
Yeah,
it goes
on the vertical,
goes on the abscissa, has the same size error bars on the abscissa. It looks like it goes from 50 to 150, which is a huge
Right.
error in percentage for that lower point. Is that really, are you telling me that the fluence that particular thing is anchored to is uncertain by such a very large amount?
well, it depends, it depends on what's counted in determining the
has
fluence.
the same fluence uncertainty. And I don't understand, you can explain, where does the uncertainty in the fluence, that's the abscissa, come from? And why is it the same for the ones way up there? Because the one way up there has an uncertainty of plus or minus, it only has an uncertainty of about 10%, whereas the one below has an uncertainty of about way more than 100%, because it's the same absolute. I want you to, before I can interpret this, and I'm a physicist, and I have spent my entire career interpreting error bars. That's what we do. That's what physicists do. I need to understand what is the origin of these uncertainties.
Well, all I can tell you is that there's a large uncertainty in the fluence because it depends on what you count in determining the fluence.
Oh.
Whether you count effective full power years or you take into account all the power level changes and so forth. That's not entirely clear from the
I understand, but
Westinghouse reports.
I understand that, but look at the one in the lower left-hand corner, and let's forget about it. That's one's labeled G. The next one is labeled D. Now, D is a sample, is a coupon that came out of Diablo Canyon early on. That's what that one
Right,
is.
yes.
All right, now, I don't understand why its fluence is not, it's 150 plus or minus 50. I don't understand how the fluence isn't understood by such a big percentage factor for that early capsule.
Okay, maybe we can come back to that.
Yeah.
I've got limited time. And
Say
so,
it again.
Yeah,
Next.
the one that has zero dose also is not physical that it could have negative dose. The one at the far left.
What I'm saying is, it looks to me like somebody took the point and drew the same cross, you know, up and down and left and right for each point. Whereas the true uncertainty can't possibly be the fluence on that point D, the one that's about, you know, the first one, not the zero, but the next, they can't possibly be that you don't
okay, I'll come back to that.
Within 50%, that's just baloney.
Okay, next slide.
Okay?
Okay, the hyperbolic, symmetric hyperbolic tan function is that equation 1. And from that, you can calculate just by mathematical manipulation, the upper shelf energy, the lower shelf energy, the fracture energy at the point of inflection, the RT NDT at the point of inflection, that's equal to T naught. And from that, you can convert from delta T 41J into RT, NDT, POI, and so forth. And then finally, you can define a extent of embrittlement by that last equation. And these help illustrate, I'll show you in the following slide, illustrate how the point of inflection is in my mind, is a superior method of following what happens with the embrittlement. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the extent of embrittlement versus fluence. And I've left the error bars off on this because I wanted to illustrate one point which seems to be consistent. And you'll see that the weld metal is by far the component that is most sensitive to fluence. But you'll notice that the upper 2 points on the weld metal, it appears that the extent of embrittlement goes to a maximum. And this appears consistently, not only in my calculations, but also in calculations that have been shown by other people. The important thing here is that it does not require a large fraction of the fracture surface to be covered by brittle facets to achieve embrittlement. And if you look at the upper right plot, you can see that a 10% change in the extent of embrittlement essentially covers the whole range of fluences up to the end of life. And so we're talking about relatively small amounts of changes in the fracture surface in order to account for the embrittlement. Next slide, please. Now, the UT volumetric testing is indispensable. First of all, we have to understand that cascade formation of hot interstitials and vacancies due to interaction with high energy neutrons. Delta T 41J test for radiation embrittlement. UT volumetric testing looks for fissures that might convert into brittle fractures under pressurized thermal shock. Initial vacancy condensation on intermetallic particles acts as a barrier to dislocation movement, and hence in a loss in ductility. That's embrittlement. These processes tend to occur in tandem as condensation of vacancies on intermetallic particles leads to fissure growth. A possible role for helium and hydrogen pressurization of fissures, leading to subcritical crack growth. And lots of hydrogen is available in the coolant. Of course, they add hydrogen to the extent of 25 to 50 centimeter cube per kilogram of H2O to the primary coolant. So there's lots of hydrogen around, but it's absolutely essential that that ultrasonic testing, volumetric testing be carried out, and it cannot be discarded, as Dr. Kirk states. That would be foolish. Next slide, please. The necessary tests, I don't disagree with everything that Dr. Kirk says. And one thing we do agree on is that many compact tension specimens should be machined from remnants of the failed Sharpie specimens from capsules S, Y, and V to measure the fracture toughness directly. A sufficient number could be machined to yield statistically meaningful values for the fracture toughness. The WOL specimens should be tested for both K1 minimum, that is, the crack would grow until the stress intensity factor becomes limiting in its lower end and the crack stops growing, and then it could be loaded in a load frame and pulled to failure in order to calculate K1C, the fracture toughness from compliance of the specimen. I'm proposing that we could use back interpolation, given that capsule B will have a fluence of about 3.7 times 10 to the 19 neutrons per centimeter squared by the time it is pulled. And by the way, it's incorrect to not to note that capsule B was added as the fourth capsule of the program as part of a deal that was struck between PG&E and the NRC for a 37-month extension of the operating license of Unit 1. So, nano indentation is also a useful measurement that could be used to supplement the mini CT and delta T 41J. Next slide, please. So in conclusions, it's our position that Unit 1 must be closed now because its continued operation has not been justified by Dr. Kirk. It must be fully tested to the satisfaction of an independent committee before reopening. Given the high fluence of capsule B, 3.6 times 3.7 times 10 to the 19, depending on when it will be actually pulled. The testing methods approved by the NRC will not tell us much. Therefore, alternative measures are necessary. And I'm suggesting backward interpolation with the low fluency end anchored by capsules S, Y, and V, and the high end anchored by capsule B. And I think that stands a very good chance of being able to recover a value for delta T 41J at the end of the initial operating period. Okay, with that, I think that's pretty well it. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'm gonna ask a question again. And if you could go back to slide number 6, it would help. It's the figure. That one. I said before that I don't understand these error bars, and it doesn't make sense to me that the error bars are as shown. I cannot believe that the lowest capsule S, the one that's, you know, it's shown, it's not the lowest left-hand corner, but it's the next one up.
Yeah, no,
I just
I see
cannot
what your
believe
point
that the
is,
fluence has that uncertainty.
and that was a mistake on my part in drawing it that way.
Right. But that's the fluence, that's the abscissa. But on the ordinate,
Yeah, but
I also find it hard to believe that RT-NDT shift is shown as about 25, and the error bar goes from 0 to 50. That seems like such a large percentage uncertainty on a measurement of something that was done whenever it was after a few years of operation.
That corresponds to one segment, and those data come from the report by ESOM. It goes CFR 6551.
Okay, now the other thing that I don't understand is that there's S, Y, and V. You know, these other, Y is the one that's at about a fluence of 1, and V is the one that's a fluence of about 1.4. They're labeled with a D there. And then, you know, the other ones are from Palisades, but I'm just looking at that.
Okay.
And I don't understand how, again, that fluence is that uncertain, that it goes from about, you know, Y goes from 1 is in the middle, but it goes from about 0.6 to about 1.4. That's a huge percentage uncertainty. We don't have uncertainties in the fluence that big. I just don't understand. Now on the ordinate, I don't understand how that measurement, which I'm looking at Y, I think is the one. It's the second. It's the, you know, the third one up. The dot on the ordinate is about 75, and the uncertainty goes from 50 to 100. That
Well,
seems to
all I
me-
can tell you is that
I
that's
just see, it
in
seems to
table
me,
4.1 in that report by Eason. They give the standard deviation of these data. That's of the 400 and something reactor database. And that's the standard deviation that they give in that table.
all right, so I just want to say that Bob Budnitz is
Well,
telling me
all I can do is to refer you to
some-
the table.
some
and,
defense or documentation or argument or technical basis needs to be provided for those uncertainties if they're to be interpreted in terms of trying to compare the screening criteria with where you are. And until that's done, which perhaps you can do, I have no complaint if you can do it, just write it up and send it in.
Well, you know,
But absent that, this thing is uninterpretable to me.
yeah. Well, the error bar and the horizontal error bar at the first point and the generic point, that was obviously misdrawn by me.
Well, I'm not going to argue the case, but I want to tell you something.
And for
Wait,
and
I
for
want to
the-
tell you something. This is very important. If you don't put
Well,
error
I
bars on
agree.
at all, if you don't put error bars at all and don't pretend to, that's not a cardinal sin. It is simply an omission. But if you put them on and say what they are and they're wrong, that's a cardinal sin, as opposed to the other one, which is not pretending to have them. So if these aren't right, I'm using your word, cardinal sin. I didn't make that word up. I would have
Well,
never.
those are the best
But that's your
error
word, and
bars
I'm
that
throwing
we
it right back at you because I'm a physicist and I understand how error bars are generated based on data and models and some, frankly, staring at your navel, and that's not wrong, but they just have to have some defense. And without them, this curve, which is the fundamental basis for your argument, doesn't hold water. I rest my case.
No, I disagree with you. I
All
totally
right, well,
disagree.
you're
with
allowed
you.
to, but I'm up here.
Okay, that's fine.
Additional comments from the committee bench?
I think I'll wait until after we've heard Dr. Kadak's.
Right, Dr. Kadak now wishes to respond to
And-
Dr.
and,
McDonald's remark?
Thank you to Dr. McDonald also for the presentation.
Right. Dr. McDonald, thank you very much for taking the time and effort to provide your input to the committee. This is a critically important matter. We will treat your information as such. And I would believe further down in this time slot, we would also entertain public comments on your presentation, Dr. McDonald. Okay, Dr. Kadak.
Should I?
Okay, Dr. Kadak, you like to reply to Dr. McDonald's?
Yeah, let me just quickly respond. Since we only got this report like less than a week ago, I think, we've had limited time, and certainly Dr. Kirk has not had time to review the details of his analysis, but we make some preliminary observations. Dr. McDonald challenges the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and American Society of Testing and Materials in terms of the methods that they use to assess embrittlement. That's pure and simple. You've heard him say that. He has developed his extent of embrittlement algorithm that Dr. Kirk has looked at and found that it has more uncertainty than NRC's approach. The other thing I'd like to make very clear is the licensing basis for Diablo Canyon is based on E185, ASTM standard -70, which requires only 3 capsules.
No, it defines 5+
I'm
capsules.
sorry, that is not correct.
Well, have a look at table 1.
We looked at table
that.
1.
Have a look at
The other-
table 1, please.
The other comment we make was Dr. McDonald's previous work on hydrogen-induced cracking has been addressed in Belgium and in the US by independent experts and not to be a credible source of flaw growth, which addresses the inspection interval allegation. And uncertainties are considered in the adjusted reference temperature calculations. And I put that up, I put the curve up, which Dr. McDonald also put up from the Kirk report. And I am surprised, I can't believe that you're suggesting that Dr. Kirk cherry-picked Palisades data and put one way above the other point.
Well,
I know
where's
I know-
the point above the
Dr.
screening
McDonald,
criteria?
Can I finish my talk and then you can reply? Because the Palisades data that he looked at was correlated to the Diablo Canyon weld wires. And as you probably also know, he also worked on Palisades and embrittlement issues. So he would know whether that data point that you put up there is relevant to the Diablo Canyon plant. In terms of uncertainties, as you also know, this equation, which defines the adjusted reference temperature, if you look at the square root term, those are adjustments made to handle uncertainties in all of the numbers, okay, including standard deviations, which Dr. Budnitz was talking about. If you look at the upper shelf energy, according to NRC's approach, these are the curves, and that's what NRC licensed this plant to. So, suggestion for Dr. McDonald and the report. You should address your concerns to the NRC about how they do the analysis for embrittlement and the appropriate code committees of ASME and ASTM. Now, I would also like to make a final recommendation for this committee for the discussion, that the committee consider endorsing Dr. Kirk's reports 1 and 2 and their conclusions on the condition of the reactor Unit 1 vessel as safe for continued operation. And with that, I will rest my case for discussion. And happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kadak. Now let us entertain public comments. All right, Dr. Budnitz's suggestion. Let us entertain committee remarks first, okay, and then we entertain public comment.
Well, I was also going to ask whether Digby McDonald wants to have a comment here too, but I want to make a point, which is that the case that McDonald makes is linked and must be linked to those data. That's the data about the vessel are what should drive our understanding. And this curve that I saw with these data are not sensible, they don't make sense to me. And therefore, the argument using those data don't make sense to me. So in order for them to make sense to me, I would have to have confidence that the data themselves have been properly interpreted, plotted correctly, and that the uncertainties that McDonald claims about them are explained. The source of the uncertainty, the magnitude, the different kinds of uncertainty, whether the uncertainties are correlated. If you have two different uncertainties and they're 100% correlated, then they don't add much. On the other hand, if they are totally uncorrelated, then they have a different character. And until those uncertainties and the data themselves are properly dealt with in this argument, I at least, the best thing I can say is I remain to be convinced. That's a kind way of saying it, but I'll say it that way. I remain to be convinced because it is only the data that speak. All these other arguments are the context for the data.
Okay.
And I know enough science to understand the context. What I don't know is whether the data are plotted properly. But this thing I'm looking at makes me not want to believe it.
Now, I do want to share with you my observations. The fact that Dr. McDonald's theory does not sit well with the orthodox NRC methodology does not automatically make it not meritorious, right? So the merits of Dr. McDonald's theory and practice need to be examined in a lot more detail, right? The fact that the agency, which I refer to as the NRC, has done it for so long in their own way, certainly it's one way. But now in front of the committee, Dr. McDonald is saying, well, maybe there are a better way, and maybe the better way would forecast a very different outcome. And that's critically important. Yes, please.
I don't know if you recall, but in Dr. Kirk's first report, he looked at the extent of embrittlement calculation and compared it to the NRC approach. And given the uncertainties in terms of fracture toughness that you have to make and assumptions you have to make, he found that the uncertainty in even in his approach was larger than that associated with the traditional methods used to evaluate embrittlement. And it's not just the NRC that I'm talking about. I'm talking about ASME and the other society, ASTM, that also have weighed in on how to do these calculations, how to do the inspection intervals, and what types of inspections are done. So it's the entire mix of challenges that I was talking about, not just the NRC.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the clarification. But nonetheless, we now had in front of the committee, Dr. McDonald is saying the orthodox way of doing business may not be the correct one. Right.
So I'll go ahead. I'd like to spend a little bit of time and discuss how it is that I'm thinking about this set of problems, and to refer also back to the original study that we did on pressurized thermal shock in 2009. The key thing with the pressurized thermal shock scenarios are that they involve a number of different things which have to be true in order to lead to damage in fuel. One of them is the question of embrittlement, and we've had good discussion here. I think that the methods that are used to assess embrittlement by the NRC have some significant intrinsic conservatism. So my primary thinking on embrittlement is the important point is to be in compliance with the current NRC requirements. And this is something that we've been debating and also probably will have to return to. Again, this is not a topic that is going to go away. Obviously, there will be new information with the inspection of capsule B and such in the future. However, there's a number of additional things that are required for fuel damage to occur due to this postulated mechanism. The first is that you have to have an initiating event that will inject a large amount of cold water into a reactor vessel while the vessel is pressurized. There's a number of things that are done that make that event unlikely to occur, and certainly pretty unlikely to occur, say, between now and our next meeting when we are likely to discuss this again. But there's a set of conservatisms with that initiating event. Likewise, the behavior of that cold water when it is injected, the way that it would flow and how buoyancy, because it's injected into the cold leg, it flows across the bottom of the cold leg and then down the downcomer. The thermal analysis that is used to project how rapid the cooling is has large amounts of conservatism built into it as well. And so the question of whether you could actually cool through the thickness and bulk in order to generate the necessary tensile stresses to cause failure is another area where there's significant conservatism in the overall set of assumptions about how this scenario could propagate. Then there's a set of questions around what are the size of the pre-existing flaws that could exist. And in the assumptions that are made in the analysis are highly conservative in that area as well, unless you go and do additional analysis because the answer doesn't have sufficient conservatism. So there's a high degree of conservatism in that set of assumptions that can be validated through things such as the ultrasonic testing, which there's a whole set of things that really do need to be done in 1R25. And then you have the question, if those tensils, if those stresses are sufficient to actually cause the vessel to crack, then what's going to happen? And the short answer is that we deterministically assume that you'll get core damage at that point. But you've got a low-pressure injection system that can pump massive quantities of water into that reactor vessel. So there's the question, are you actually going to end up with fuel getting damaged even if the vessel has cracked? And I think that we've not analyzed that, but that's yet another area of conservatism added on to all of the others. So given this, the set of things, all of which have to happen to lead to a significant consequence from the PTS scenarios, we can deal with the uncertainty in each of them we have through applying large amounts of conservatism. It doesn't mean that it's not important for us to understand the state of embrittlement and to use the data as well as we can. However, that's just one piece of the overall problem in assessing the risk of this type of accident transient and whether it actually creates a significant risk that we could see a transient occur where damage could occur to fuel in Unit 1. That's how I'm thinking about it, but I want to hear additional discussion, and then the committee is going to have to reach some sorts of decisions about what our conclusions are and what we want to do next.
Yes, indeed. I like what I just heard from Dr. Peterson. I like what I just heard because this provides comfort to the committee that just in case Dr. Kirk is wrong, we still have other safety margins. Okay, Dr. Butness?
Yeah, but I don't want to go there.
You don't want to go where?
I understand the extra conservatisms. I was involved in the original thinking, I'm proud to say, way back in the early days when this came up. And Part 61 was being debated before it was developed. But I think that without invoking the fact, and it is a fact that the NRC's criteria have those extra conservatisms, this argument on its own doesn't seem like it has sufficient strength to support the recommendation that the plant ought to be shut down this afternoon. In other words, that's you better have a lot of support for that, and I don't see it. It doesn't mean it ain't, it just means it doesn't seem like it's supported by the arguments I've seen. I'm just talking about the embrittlement, never minding that it's all this extra conservatism, which I also know a lot about. So with that, it seems to me that while additional investigation of this is worthy and should be pursued, in the meantime, if I was asked whether this plant should continue to run or needs to be shut down now, I just gave you my answer. You can figure it out, or I'll tell you. It doesn't have to be shut down now. And the reason it doesn't is that there is not sufficient support in these arguments, as I see them, to contravene the rest of the argument. And especially because I'm staring at the data, and the data don't look like, as I understand them, that they support this interpretation, okay? Now, what should one do? I think it is meritorious to continue these investigations and to see if the data that McDonald presents, when properly dealt with, do or don't provide additional insight that I don't get from this plot that he's got here, because those error bars are nonsense. All right, I mean, nonsense meaning they don't make sense to me. I shouldn't use the word nonsense, I'll say it better. They don't make sense to me.
And besides,
And hence can't be used by me, at least, to interpret this as flunking the test.
well, in addition to Dr. Butler's comments, in order to shut down a nuclear power plant, I do not believe this committee has the authority to do that.
No, of course we don't have the authority, but
Right,
let me
the-
tell you, if I thought this plant had to be shut down tomorrow, I'd tell you.
Right.
I don't have the
right.
authority to shut it down,
Exactly,
but I would tell
exactly.
you, but I
Right,
don't think
right.
that.
You would tell.
I have no, wait. I have an obligation, not as a member of this committee, but as a citizen.
Yes, indeed.
If I thought that was true, I would publish
Yes,
it
yes.
instantly with my own
Yes.
criteria, and I would file a Part
Yes.
21 with the NRC, and I would push it as hard as I could.
But-
But I don't believe that's true here.
Yes, but since both Dr. Butners and I had spent some significant portion of our career within the federal agency called the NRC, I believe the NRC had the process to deal with urgent matter, safety matter like
Of course
this.
they do, thank God they do.
Right, so there's a petition process, there is adjudicatory legal proceedings, plus there are plenty of interventional opportunities. Now, the members of the public may had some misgiving about how fast does that process move. But collectively, the NRC really is the 5,000-pound elephant in the room when we are talking about, let us shut it down.
Maybe, but we don't have to go there. If we thought it needed to be shut down, we should have the obligation to say so right now. Okay? I just don't happen to think that's so. And by the way, and where that goes is the NRC would get it, and they'd say, Bob Budnitz said that, gee, is that worth a nickel or is it worth $1? That's for them to decide.
Well, but that's certainly true, but then what quantity information do we require before we pull the trigger and talk to the New York Times?
Well, I wouldn't talk to the New York Times.
Right.
I'd call up the chairman of the NRC, but let me tell you what evidence you need. You need stronger evidence than has been presented here and an explanation of it, none of which is present. These data, and it's only the data that I care about, because I know the context, these data do not speak that message to me.
And that's understood. I think the additional information we need is the public comment.
Right, right. Let's entertain public remarks.
We have a timer?
No. Who will be the timekeeper? Mr. Rahi?
I'll be the
Okay. As we indicated earlier, Dr. Nelson.
Corey, do we
members of
have
the
a
public
timer?
Will be provided with 4
Okay.
minutes so that we can accommodate as many people as we possibly
Right.
can. Okay,
Okay,
Dr.
so
Nelson, welcome.
the timer will be kept by our folks at AGP Video, is that correct? Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Welcome, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. I've been a strong critic of Digby McDonald's conduct in the past. Unfortunately, to me, he seems like a fellow who has one tool in his toolbox, and he wants to bang that tool really hard, and that is embrittlement. So in previous testimony to the committee, he falsely claimed that the Titanic sunk because of embrittlement. And unfortunately, the facts don't fit that narrative, as the identical ship, the Olympia, continued for another 20 years of operation before it sank. I believe it was sunk by a torpedo. And the reason why the Titanic sunk was because it struck a great big iceberg, and that doesn't do well for a large ship when it strikes a great big iceberg. But again, Digby has this one tool in his toolbox, embrittlement, and I believe he thinks that if he shouts it enough, that we're somehow going to be convinced. And then he presents to us at the last possible minute a bunch of, quite honestly, incomprehensible or very hard to comprehend data that he claims supports his hypothesis. Well, when I look at what the NRC has said about second relicensing intervals, that's the interval from 60 to 80 years. They looked at the embrittlement question for that entire set of reactors that were coming into that category. They said no concerns about embrittlement. So I continue to be very skeptical of McDonald's claims. And I also am really concerned that he was told by this committee that his comments were due by March 15th, 2024. And apparently, he finally felt that he had his stuff together by around June 15th of 20. I'm sorry, his responsibility is to explain. If he is so passionate about this, his responsibility is to explain this clearly in plain English. Instead, he relies on jargon, he relies on tests that certainly don't have wide consensus, and he somehow thinks that, again, if he can mumble over what other people are saying, that somehow we're going to believe him. That's not how science works. That's not how engineering works. So I may be a little bit upset here, but I'm upset because he's trying to ram something down the committee's throat, and I think the committee is very proper in saying, explain it more clearly, explain your error bars more clearly, and darn it, make your case convincing. It's not convincing right now is what I hear. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Additional public comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John Giesman on behalf of the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. As I indicated at your last meeting, my client has not chosen to engage on the substance of this issue. It really beyond our focus on state agencies, and it remains so. And I emphasize, I take no position on the merits of this question, nor does my client.
Fair enough.
I don't want to be the skunk at the picnic here, but I do want to urge Dr. Peterson to carefully consider the appropriate recusal standard in this circumstance. You've made very clear in your discussion, at least to my ear, that the NRC standards or methodology or orthodoxy, you pick the term, but the NRC approach to this subject is central to your view of what its outcome should be. And I believe, Dr. Peterson, your role as the Chief Technology Officer for Kairos does in fact create a financial interest that you should consider whether or not a reasonable person would conclude that you could render an unbiased decision that directly challenged the NRC approach, methodology, orthodoxy on such a central question. And I raise that question. I don't believe it needs to be resolved tonight. I'm hopeful from listening to your discussion that you're choosing to go a little slow on this issue, but I think it's very important to the committee's credibility and your own, sir, to take a very well-considered approach. And that's the extent of my comment. I thank you for the opportunity to make it.
Thank you, Mr. Giesen. Thank you.
Sherry Lewis for San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace. I have 3 points to make. What came up was the slide about the fragments testing from the Sharpie stuff. Okay, I don't know how to say it, but I think it would be good to do some of that testing, to urge to have some of that testing done that might verify some of the points that Dr. McDonald is making. The other thing is I was very interested in what Dr. Budnitz had to say in the debate with Dr. McDonald. And then at times when Dr. Budnitz was talking, Dr. McDonald came in and tried to talk, and I had a hard time understanding the sound quality of Dr. McDonald's discussion.
I apologize.
So, wait a minute. Yeah. So I would like to know more about what Dr. McDonald's debate with Dr. Budnitz was, because I like very much the points that you brought up, Dr. Budnitz. The third thing is, my request is that you folks don't, at this point, endorse Dr. Kirk's view yet, because you've only pretty much just received Dr. McDonald's. Dr. McDonald is a highly respected doctor who teaches at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley. He's a well-known material scientist, and I think his views are to be listened to, and I appreciate the debate between all the different sides. So again, to go back to the fragments testing, I don't know how to say it right, but do you know what I'm talking about? The slide that talked about the different Sharpie testings that could be done, taking the fragments. Okay, you guys know. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
Good evening, Linda Seeley with San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace. Thank you for being here. I also got pretty confused in the conversation between Dr. Budnitz and Dr. McDonald. And I hope that you will continue that conversation with him. And if he's made an error on,
We will.
on the error bar, I don't know what it's called, but that graph, it seems like it's extraordinarily important. And hopefully you will not make a decision tonight about endorsing Dr. Kirk's report, because that would be jumping the gun. Also, this idea of I don't exactly understand this either, because I'm not an engineer or any of that, but knowing that they have, PG&E has a bunch of samples that were tested that could be broken apart, and at UC Berkeley, as I understand it, there's someone who has a lab, and they can test these tiny little samples and get a more accurate sampling, because it seems to me, through my non-engineering eyes, that one of the big problems of here is a paucity of data, that there aren't enough data points to be able for anybody to make a really solid analysis of the embrittlement of the Unit 1 reactor, especially the welds, I think it is. The other thing is that you have a lot of influence now. Being on this committee has a great deal of influence, and you know it, with the Public Utilities Commission. And they are looking to you to be the arbiters of our future safety. And so that's a tremendous responsibility for you to undertake and to do with a lot of gravitas. So I encourage you to be patient, to really look at things, to get more data points, to do this thing correctly, so that we here on the Central Coast can rest in assurance that we are going to be safe. Thank you.
Thank you for the remark. Yes, Dr. Budnitz has some comments.
I need to plead guilty here of having interrupted Digby McDonald in a way that probably I shouldn't have. And I would like to stop right here and ask whether he has anything to add at this point of clarification or elaboration or anything that would be helpful, because at this stage, we've invoked him, and he's sitting out there. I hope he's still sitting out there, somewhere in Northern California, where hearing from him would be, I think, of great benefit. Unless Digby, unless you say, not now or whatever, I mean, I respect your, whatever you come up with. Okay.
I don't think he's online any longer, is he?
He is online. We've asked him to unmute multiple times.
Okay, and then the second thing is, there was a comment about 10 minutes ago by somebody else. I completely respect the statement that we heard a while back that he was ill for a while, and God bless him, he's better, and let's just hope he's always better. Okay, that's just okay. I didn't come to this last meeting because I was ill. Okay, those things happen.
Mr. Chairman, could I just respond to Ms. Healy's comment? I don't know if you had a chance to read Dr. Kirk's 2 reports. I mean, we tried to write it as plainly as we could so people could understand it. We didn't succeed, obviously. But based on the paucity of data argument, when he did that supplemental analysis, he used, I would say, hundreds of data points from other reactors that have similar wells, okay? And that's where he showed the upper shelf energy could be lower than the typical NRC standard would require. So it's not that there's only 5 data points upon which this is based. The NRC curves that you saw, the solid lines, they're based on history of reactors who have been tested, sampled, analyzed, and is upon that curve that they look at the data from Diablo Canyon to see how closely it matches the data of the industry. So it's not just Diablo Canyon, 5 points or 3 points, and that's the end of the story. That's not the end of the story at all. It's based on industry experience with embrittlement for over 50 years. Different types of reactors, different types of welds, and that's how they've concluded. So just the paucity of data is not the issue here, only issue.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may address a couple of the comments that have been made to date about let's go do more testing. The NRC process that we keep debating, we touched on it a while ago, is based on code cases, code standards that have been prepared by the professional organizations, ASTM, and others, using experts and committees that look at all the different ways to test, all the different ways to look at this problem and come to a consensus on the best way to do things. To go take a whole nother testing method that hasn't gone through that process and introduce that into this situation can cut both ways. It might show you that you're worse off, but it might give you a false sense of security that you're okay when you're not, because you're proposing to use a test method that hasn't gone through that kind of certification and approval process. So it sounds like it will give you a better sense of security, but that it may not. It could end up in a non-conservative situation. Thank you.
Well said. Welcome to the podium.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Bruce Severance. I only have 4 minutes, is my understanding, so I really don't have the opportunity to respond to what I feel were misrepresentations about what I said in my papers, and I don't feel it's fair that I'm not going to have time to respond to misrepresentations. However, I think if we're going to boil this down, first of all, the DCISC is empowered by SB 846 to make somewhat executive decisions regarding your recommendations are going to be taken very seriously by the state of California. So if you endorse this report, it's basically a green light to go to 2030. And you are empowered in that way. And I've got a quote here from the preamble of SB 846. The bill would require the DCISC committee to undertake additional duties as provided, including annually transmitting its findings and recommendations for improved safety to certain public entities, et cetera. So your opinions here do really matter. It's not up to the NRC, it's up to you. I think first and foremost, Dr. Kirk and I had a very amicable conversation a couple of months ago, and basically doing the mini CT testing, he does recognize, and he says the NRC recognizes it as a very reliable method for retesting already fractured samples. He had issues with the nano indentation testing. So I say, fine. That's actually on page 40 of part 2 of the report where he states that. And my argument is, look, if he thought it might cost about $1 million, he wasn't exactly sure. So let's say it's 700,000 to 1.4 million to retest both reactors. That's 1/1000th of what the state of California is putting into extended operation. Is that not a good investment? Wouldn't the state of California want to spend 1/1000th of their budget to verify that this is not a financial risk for ratepayers, for the state of California, et cetera? So when SB 846 is calling for clear safety measures, and PG&E, it has deemed its own test data non-credible as per the equations in RG 1.99. No, don't shake your head. It's in the 2000 table D2, Appendix D, page D5 of the 2003 Capsule V report. It's right there. So don't shake your head, no. I know what I'm talking about.
My point is, we've had this conversation internally. The classifications of credible and non-credible are unfortunate
Okay, so here, I
because-
understand. Don't interrupt me right now. I understand about credibility. So let's say we've got, 5 sets that are now being considered, okay? If you read 10 CFR 5061, it's calling for consideration of all data and all surveillance reports, which Kirk selectively means we shouldn't consider historical reports, such as the 2006 report that predicted that Diablo Canyon would be within 3% of maximum screening limits by November of this year. We're not supposed to consider that, but we're supposed to automatically integrate Palisades and Diablo Canyon data without considering the requirements in Appendix H. Now, Digby McDonald brought this up, and nobody seems to be paying attention to this detail.
Thank you. That's 4 minutes.
Okay, I appreciate being able to finish my sentence.
Finish the thought.
Yeah. So, the bottom line is Appendix H Kirk makes the argument that sister plants are any 2 plants that share similar limiting materials. That definition does not appear anywhere in the regulations, and he claims that because these are sister plants, they're exempt from Appendix H. There's nothing in 10 CFR 5061 or Appendix H that states the definitions that he's using to give you an exemption. So I ask you to investigate that. There is nothing in the regulations. He is misrepresenting what the regulations actually say, and maybe that's a common practice at the NRC. But I don't see that if you're using equation 5 from 10 CFR 50 to specifically reduce the chemistry factors that are supposed to be there to address the uncertainties around chemical impurities in the welds, there's nothing in the regulations that say you're supposed to automatically use equation 5 to integrate the data from 2 plants that have not been properly qualified as integrated surveillance participating plants. And that's clearly defined in 10 CFR 50, Federal Register, Volume 60, number 243. Page 65,476. It's clearly stated there. It's clearly stated there. So I don't agree that this integration is according to NRC procedures. You can repeat that over and over again, and I feel that it's gaslighting. It really isn't. It's not appropriate.
Dr. Butner says a remark.
Yeah, I understand that point. You've made it before. It doesn't compel because The NRC's regulations don't compel me. I personally very much understand them in detail, and I'm happy that they're there, but it doesn't compel me to make a decision based on them, right? I just want to say that to the public.
I would like to invite the state of California.
Wait, I just want to finish this.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason is because they were put in place for decisions of a different character. And their rationale, when adopted, doesn't perfectly fit our case. So although the technical guidance therein and whether or not a plant can meet them is important input information to me, it's not determinative. And I just want to explain the basis for my being able to say that. The first pressurized thermal shock near event occurred in either late 1979 or 1980. It was at Rancho Seco up in Folsom County. And there was not a pressurized thermal shock. It was a cold water injection that didn't lead to the bad event, but it scared everybody. At the time, I was the deputy director of the Office of Research at the NRC, and a few months later, I was the director of the Office of Research. And a few months later, they had another near miss at another plant in the South. I can't remember which one. And about a month after that, a research program was initiated under the NRC at Oak Ridge, and that then branched out to several other places to understand the phenomenon. I was the director of research when that was authorized, although I left before the program was completed several years later, but I followed it all my life. I really, really understand the basis for Part 61. I'm proud to say that. And it's a terrific regulation, although conservative. That is, if you meet it, you got a lot of margin. But it doesn't determine for Bob Budnitz this decision. The reason it doesn't is because this decision has other parameters in them that aren't contemplated by or relevant to the situation we're in. In particular, whether or not a particular thing is, what terms they used for it, and before I was born, I'm joking, that doesn't bother me at all. I don't care. I'm just looking at the data, okay? And whether it is assigned as having some terminology, I just want to say, you can say that 1,000 times, it isn't going to speak to me. If the data are there and they're valid and they were measured properly, I'm going to stare at them, whether or not they're considered valid or competent or whatever that funny term is that they use, which doesn't make any difference to me.
But Dr. Budnitz, I am sympathetic.
Really important to me to say
I am sympathetic to Mr. Severn's statement.
Me too.
If he came forward to the committee and indicated there was a non-compliance, and this is not exactly his term,
Me too.
vis-a-vis to NRC regulation, to me, that point need to be, it's worthy of further inquiry as a minimum.
No, yeah, but I would say it's worthy of further inquiry, but it's not determinative.
Oh, of course, no.
No, that's really, really important.
Right.
Because-
It may not compel you, Dr. Budnitz, but it's worthy of further inquiry.
That's why I can only talk for me. Bruce Severance has said more than once, probably several times, that it speaks to him in a determinative way. Okay, that's your opinion. You're allowed to that. But I'm sitting here, and it doesn't speak to me determinatively. It's only input information, and the reason is because it's been superseded in an important way by a whole lot of other information. It's done.
Dr. Peterson.
It comes down to if we could just spend a little bit of money to verify the embrittlement, because prior data have been deemed non-credible or outside of standard deviations.
Okay.
And integration with Palisades is questionable. So why not do the mini C? I would be perfectly happy with running for another 20 years if we had new mini CT data that gave us a very clear indication that the 2011 report is correct. I would feel so much better if you would consider requiring 10 cents out of every $100 spent by the state of California toward this additional safety measure. It's not very much to ask, 10 cents out of every $100.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Chairman, I will have to ask you to submit your additional remark in writing to the committee.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I've already stated
Right,
all of this
right,
in
right.
writing.
Thank you.
You have over 100 pages from me.
We've seen it, we've seen
Thank you
it.
for
Thank
the
you.
remark. Let's ask for additional public remarks from members of the public in the room or remotely.
Yeah, there's no hands currently raised.
Okay, okay. Any additional public comments from members of the public in the room?
I would like to ask whether Digby McDonald has, out there, has anything to say. He's not in the room, so of course.
Right, right.
I'm just opening my arms.
Right.
Because,
Dr. Butters is waiting.
His wisdom could be
Dr.
very
Butters
beneficial.
is waiting for Dr. McDonald to provide additional
And I
remarks.
respect it if he says no, it's okay.
Dr. McDonald, are you available? Are you still
Yeah.
online?
Yes, I'm here. I would like to ask for an opportunity to respond to some of the comments related to my report.
Go for it.
And what I tried to show is that the original definition of the reference temperature, which was made completely arbitrarily by ASME, leads to a ridiculous result. And that irradiation leads to a negative shift in RT-NDT. There's no way of getting around that factor. The second point that I'd like to make is that the extent of embrittlement is a very useful concept because it describes how little embrittlement in terms of the area of brittle fracture facets on the fracture surface are necessary in order to get a brittle response. And as one of my graphs showed, just a 10% change spans essentially the whole range of fluence up to the end of the initial operating period. Thirdly, I think we would do well to adopt using mini compact toughness specimens in order to measure the fracture toughness directly. That can be done partly using the remnants of Sharpie specimens that have already been tested, or you can get the data by testing the WOLs. And even though these capsules contain WOLs, I've never really seen a good presentation on what the actual data looks like from the WOLs. Presumably the crack arrests at some suitably low K1C value, but I've never actually seen what that is. Now, as far as my graph where I showed the error bars, I will correct those. There is a problem with the error bars on the horizontal axis, but the error bars, the 1 sigma values that come from the report by Eason and Odette from their table 4.1 are pretty solid. So nevertheless, I would like to take the opportunity to correct that and submit a corrected version of that graph. So I think that's pretty well all I'm asking at this point. Thank you.
Dr. McDonald, may I ask you, since you have raised critically important information in front of the committee, may I ask you, have you consider participating in a formal adjudicatory proceeding in which discovery and direct examination and cross-examination by opposing counsels to get at the truth? Have you considered participating in any formal adjudicatory proceeding in front of the NRC?
Sure. Yeah, I'll participate in any proceedings that, whatever you think is useful, I'm a willing participant.
You know, the reason I ask, in my formal experience as a federal judge on the NRC bench, my experience and training informed me there's only, not only, there is a very reliable process of discovery, of direct examination, and cross-examination by opposing counsel. That was a reliable method of establishing facts.
Yeah. But whatever you think is appropriate, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to correct the record. In response to the gentleman who voiced indignation that I was late getting my report in, I should point out that I've been hospitalized extensively for the last, on and off for the last several months. And so I was not trying to dodge submitting my report. I just didn't have the physical strength in order to complete it.
Digby, we on this panel here, the committee understand that fully, completely, and only want to wish you the best, okay? There's no question that we understood that right along.
So if that would be feasible, then I will get to work on it right away.
Mr. Chairman,
Does that conclude the public?
may I make a comment or two?
Yes, indeed.
So as I step back and look at who's approved what, the NRC procedure, the process for approving a reactor vessel's embrittlement, is based on a lot of good science, a lot of good data from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME, ASTM, American Society for Testing and Materials. As Dr. Budnitz said, he knows the NRC process. It's a good process. It's well-founded. Now, PG&E has looked at their reactor vessel, looked at the data. They've submitted their data to NRC, and they've said the data is worth not just the vessel now, but the vessel is good for 60 years. That's 20 more years from now. The NRC, independently with their experts and the data from ASME and PG&E, has also said the Unit 1 reactor vessel is good for 60 years. That's 20 years from now. We looked at this. We hired Dr. Kirk. I was part of the group in the committee here that interviewed experts. We settled on Dr. Kirk for several reasons. One, he's got an extensive educational background in mechanical engineering and materials. Second, he worked for Westinghouse and helped Westinghouse develop their processes for determining reactor vessel embrittlement. He worked for the NRC and helped develop their process and their equations for the same thing, embrittlement. And after he left NRC, he's been an independent consultant doing what we asked him to do. So we consider him.
I'm not questioning Dr. Kirk's credentials in any way. Okay, what I'm saying is that we don't have enough data on this particular pressure vessel.
And I'm
we've got,
saying,
we've
I'm
got
saying
no reference temperature data since 2003.
appreciate you letting me finish, sir.
Okay,
I'm
we've got
saying-
capsule B, which was supposed to be the fourth capsule in a 4-capsule surveillance program that was in agreement between NRC and PG&E that it would be pulled 16 years ago. And for one reason or another, and you can speculate on motives, it's never been pulled. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to hold my breath for it being pulled next year either.
If you let me finish now, sir, please. Thank you. So Dr. Kirk is one we respect and one we've hired to make this determination for us. He's also found that the proper NRC procedures were followed and that the reactor vessel is good for 60 years. That's 20 years from now, not just now. Dr. Kirk, at our request, did an independent review analysis, independent of NRC's process, which also determined that the reactor vessel in Unit 1 is good for 60 years, 20 years from now.
Okay, I think it's telling though that he sought.
Dr. Martel,
advice
if we could just let
of
Mr.
PG&E.
Wardell finish, and then you'll have an opportunity to respond.
Now, regarding the testing, there's been testing done on 2 or 3 capsules, and Diablo Canyon is a 3-capsule plant. Those capsules have been pulled and tested. Capsule B is the 4th one, and if and when it's tested, it doesn't have to be tested until 2028 or 2030, I've forgotten which. It's not a factor in developing what the reactor vessel is like now. It's one that will determine the acceptability of embrittlement for either 80 or 100 years total. So in my opinion, capsule B is not going to be much help right now or for 20 years. It will be for 80 or 100 years if we go that far, which I don't think we will. So what I'm saying is this, in my mind, we have 3 technical consultants on the committee here. They're sitting at the table. We've reviewed all the data. We've reviewed what PG&E has done. We've reviewed what NRC has said. We've had extensive conversations with Dr. Kirk, who is, I consider, quite the expert in this area. We find that all 3 have the right basis and the right evaluation, the right conclusions, that the Unit 1 reactor vessel is good for at least 60 years, which is 20 more years from now. Therefore, I'm comfortable with the fact that we can endorse Dr. Kirk's report and that the Unit 1 vessel is good for 60 years, 20 more years from now. That's it. Thanks.
Digby, before you say, I just want to add a comment. This is Bob Budnitz. I am all ears for an argument that you might bring based on the data that would support your position. But I want to say that right now, the notion that the data support an immediate shutdown of that plant does not convince me. Okay? I just want to say that. Maybe it convinces you. Apparently so, because you wrote it. But it doesn't convince me. And because it doesn't convince me, I won't endorse that until I hear an argument that does convince me, which means we've got time. I don't know whether it's 5 years or 20, although I have a predilection for the latter. But I know down in my bones that I have not seen the evidence that would support the recommendation that the plant must shut down now. Okay? That requires more evidence to convince me.
Okay. Okay. Dr. McDonald, you just heard Dr. Budnett's personal view and also Mr. Furman Wardell's personal view. And if I like to share with you, this committee is a collegial body, majority rules, okay? And the committee.
Majority is two.
Right, this committee has not yet even entertained, you know, the motion to either endorse or do something else with Dr. Kirk's report.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, could I just summarize what I think the argument is at this point? There's a 2011 document produced by Westinghouse that updates all the data, all the analysis, all the fluence information that Dr. Kirk used to update his embrittlement estimate. In addition, he has located 2 weld specimens from the Palisades reactor. And with that data set, he's been able to show 60 years of safe operation for embrittlement. The debate seems to be centered on whether or not that sister plant data is appropriately used,
In part.
and whether or not we've considered all the history that led up to that Westinghouse report in 2011, which really doesn't matter because the current data set is that which Kirk used. And I understand the consternation about credibility, but the process is very clear. I just also looked up the integrated surveillance program, which Mr. Severance talked about. And Diablo Canyon is not part of that program, period. It was never part of that program. And I can, if you want, I don't want to read it to you, but it allows the use of sister plant data in evaluating embrittlement. It allows it, not restricted.
Yes,
And that's
indeed.
what Kirk used. So I think we have a closed set of data. There's no condition imposed on this statement, which you can look at when you come by. But that's where we are. And
Right. Yes, indeed. Dr. Keita, you are more than a capable advocate of your position. You know, the committee take well notice of that, right? Again, we still need to consider this committee, in my humble opinion, has the obligation and duty to consider all relevant information and material information in front of the committee, right? So.
Linda Seeley, very quickly, Dr. Lamb, you asked Dr. McDonald if he would be willing to be in an adjudicatory process. And I wanted to let you know that San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace has petitioned the NRC for that. And so, yes, he would be available.
But see, we do know that. We've had,
Okay.
you've given us.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, well, I thought you didn't because you asked.
And
We are well aware.
And we're following it as closely as we can.
Thank you for that piece of information, even though
Okay.
I may have known it, but it is helpful for you
Okay.
to put it into our record.
We're going to
Thank you.
Thank you.
follow it as closely as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. Dr. Peterson?
So have we, the first thing to emphasize is we're obviously going to come back to this in upcoming public meetings again. Have we completed the public comment period at this point? Because I think we need to have some discussion and then conclude. One more, please.
Oh, one more, okay.
Welcome.
Thank you, and I just want Lori Wolf with Alliance.
Identify yourself so that people watching distance can know.
That's what I was trying to do. Lori Wolf, Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility.
Thank you.
And I wanted to just mention that over all the years that I've attended, you've provided a pretty safe space for people with really divergent opinions. We're really different. We're not here to be friends with each other. We're here to present information and to evaluate the way things appear to all of us, and then you decide. But tonight was not a safe place for some of us to even be in the room because of the behavior, rude behavior. And I would just request going forward that when things get out of control about personal attacks, that it gets shut down. It was really uncomfortable being in the audience. You look a little confused.
No. Thank you. No,
All
I
right.
understand.
Thank you very much, because we are real different. And it has been a safe place,
We're
but
trying to-
tonight it got pretty
We're trying to
contentious.
listen, and I thought your comment is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your remark.
He already had his 4 minutes.
Gene Nelson,
Dr.
Californians
Nelson, I believe you have used up.
you've already allowed several people to go way over their time. You've allowed people to come up multiple times to the podium. So I believe that in interest of fairness, you should allow me. Now, if you don't, fine, tell me to leave.
Make it short.
Yeah,
Yeah.
make it short and sweet.
I strongly agree with what Furman had to say. He's focused on the data, which is what we should be listening to, not to, okay, this group has an ideological axe to grind, and they're going to try to run this thing out as long as possible. Let's focus on the data. Let's focus on the robust data that the NRC already relies on to answer this question. Again, we're talking about a reactor pressure vessel that I think is on the order of 8 to 10 inches of high quality steel with a liner inside of it. And again, trying to get this fearful picture in people's minds. Again, the NRC operates very conservatively, and they have said very clearly that this plant is not at risk under the plausible scenarios. And sure, you can come up with all kinds of fearful stuff, but we need to focus on what is the reality and not the fear. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Additional public remarks? There being none, let us conclude the public remark session and go to a discussion on the committee's bench. Dr. Butness?
I want to predict a path forward. If anybody wants to bring new or different information and perspectives, I'm all ears. Okay? I am not the least bit interested in another report that says the same thing that was sent in already by anybody. Right? Because I read it already. Saying it over doesn't help me. Maybe it helps them, and maybe it helps you, but it doesn't help me. So I would like to plead with anybody out there, and members of the public, or any other engineer, or whoever they happen to be, or PG&E, or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that if some new information, or new analysis, or new perspective, or something new is in your mind, write it up, and tell us about it, okay? And I'm all ears. All right. I did say that what I have seen till now does not convince me that this plant needs to be shut down right away. I just haven't seen it, and I've looked at it all. And I believe I'm not alone on that assessment amongst my colleagues here, all right? But please, it doesn't help us really at all to send us stuff that's already been sent. To repeat those arguments again, it just is, you can spin your wheels, but it doesn't help me at all. So I believe that the best path forward is for us to accept, for sure, accept Kirk's report.
We've done that.
On its face. I don't know what word to use, we'll have to figure that out. And say that because of its merit, that it currently represents my position at as a member of the DCISC, and if the others agree with me, it'll represent the DCISC's position. That's what I believe. I believe it represents my position. But I've got an open mind, and if anybody has some new information, I'm all ears, okay? Including the sort of thing that McDonald raised, where because I didn't understand his presentation of the data, I rejected the arguments based on it, and I think I'm on sound footing there because either they're wrong or my understanding's wrong. Somebody's got to clarify that just for me. So that's what I would recommend, but I'll let my colleagues decide what they're going to recommend. Okay? And just to repeat, I would recommend that we accept his report and endorse his conclusions, but say that they're provisional until and unless, but they'll stand on their merits unless we hear sound arguments based on the data.
So are you?
And it doesn't help to repeat the arguments we've already heard. I heard all that stuff. Don't say that again.
Now, Dr. Barnes, are you recommending, in your view, a provisional endorsement? Is that what you said?
Recommending an endorsement today because everything we do is always provisional. By definition, it's provisional. There is nothing definitive about reactor safety.
So
Dr. Peterson?
I'd like to be able to add a few comments. I do think we need to think through the process for how we discuss these types of topics, and maybe we need to spend more time listening and less time talking ourselves. However, my conclusion at this point, I think, mirrors largely what Bob Budnitz has said, which is that the evidence that we have currently does not support an immediate action related to the vessel, and my conclusions in review of Dr. Kirk's report are that it supports that the vessel is in compliance with NRC requirements around embrittlement, and that there's additional areas of conservatism that I had mentioned in my earlier remarks that further reduce the probability that we could have an event that could lead to core damage due to pressurized thermal shock. The key point is that we have received new information. The information from Dr. McDonald was received so late that there was no opportunity for Dr. Kirk to review it. Moreover, I personally have questions that I need to get addressed, such as the use of linear extrapolation on something where that large body of other data would expect that it would be a curve, and there's a few other things related to error bars. So given that there is new information and that there will continue to be new information provided, we need to treat this topic as an open item, and it's likely one that we will cover again in the future, particularly when the capsule B is removed during 1R25. And I think it's our position that it needs to get removed and studied. So I'm prepared at this point to move forward to endorse Dr. Kirk's report, with the caveat that we need to then subsequently examine and identify any new information that might change the conclusions, including a review of the material that has been provided by Dr. McDonald, and that we can adjust and change going forward. That's my position at this point.
Okay.
Perry, you pretty much paraphrased what I was saying, so thank you.
If I could just add a comment, when we're talking about the conclusions in Dr. Kirk's report, what we're actually talking about is those specific conclusions that are set forth in part 2 of Dr. Kirk's report on pages 3 through 5. I just want to be clear for the record.
Right. Now, let me share with you all about my view. Without saying anything negative about Dr. Kirk's credential or the ringing endorsement of the committee's 3 senior technical consultants of Dr. Kirk's work, without saying anything negative about that, I'm keenly sensitive to what I had heard from our technical consultants and also from our 2 esteemed members of the committee. I am at this point not persuaded to endorse Dr. Kirk's report for a simple reason. We still got 2 pending opinions before the committee. that need to be resolved. One is what we just hear from Dr. McDonald. As Dr. Peterson very capably indicated, we had no time to review it. Right, we just got it. That's one. And then we still had the continuing participation from Mr. Severance, who has spent huge amount of time and effort on this issue. Now, both of them has not been resolved to my satisfaction. Because of that reason, I am not persuaded to endorse Dr. Kirk's report. Now, as you all well know, this committee is a collegial body, and if both of our committee members are ready to move forward, then let us entertain a motion for endorsement.
I want to preface it by saying that in this business, reactor safety, new information arises all the time, and we always have to not only have an open mind, but have an open front door to such information, and we'll review it when we see it. I'm not only there, that's sort of how I've lived my life right along. So with that caveat, what I know now would support the following motion, that the committee should accept and endorse Mark Kirk's reports, the two of them, and say that those conclusions represent the committee's position at this time, and put the words in the at this time.
And if I could just add a little context, and that was a perfect segue,
Would
because
you-
the context I wanted to add was this is our last meeting before the end of our annual report period. And this issue that we've debated tonight and have debated on numerous occasions at great length in the past, is of concern to not only the entities that appoint the members of this committee, but also to the members to whom we report.
Fair enough.
And our primary method of reporting is in our annual report. Now, the committee, this will be the last meeting that's included in the annual report. The annual report will then be prepared. The committee will have a chance to make specific conclusions in its own words in the annual report, which will be approved at the October meeting.
But by October, we may have a lot more under our belt
There
that
may
might
be more.
be useful.
There may be more. Yes, I just wanted to point
And
out
if
that,
that's so,
but it is important. I
we'll
mean,
take
there
it.
is interest in the community, as everybody has pointed out, and the committee really speaks to the legislature, to its appointing entities, to the governor in our annual report.
I understand. So I therefore believe that we need to accept the report so it can be included in our annual report.
We accepted it at the last meeting. The report
we
has
have
been
accepted.
accepted, formally accepted. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Unanimously.
given that it's apparent that we won't have a unanimous endorsement of the report, and principally because we have new information which has been provided at a late point in time and with justifiable reasons because of Dr. McDonald's significant health problems, I do think it's important for us to be in a position to have a more unanimous consensus on the committee about endorsement of the report. And I'm willing to defer that to the October meeting at this point, because the report will be included in the annual report because it has been accepted.
Right, it has been accepted in our last public meeting, right? So we will forward that report.
And functionally, we're coming back to this topic again. We do need to address the specifics of the new information provided by Dr. McDonald. And also, it's very important that we have the capsule be removed and that data is added.
It's going to happen anyway.
And we will, those results will come back and we will review this topic again.
Okay, so let me play this back to you, Per. There is, in fact, no operational significance to an endorsement because endorsement, as opposed to endorsing something that urged a change, which we're not, right? So, no, what I'm saying is that operationally, if I could persuade my colleagues, I would endorse it. Understanding, of course, that any such endorsement is subject to re-evaluation when we get new information. Okay? That's what I would do, but if I can't convince you that I can't, it's okay.
Okay, okay, so now there's no motion.
You know what I mean? See what I mean?
Right.
All right?
So now there's no motion on the table.
Well, no, the motion doesn't mean anything because I don't have a second. There's no second. That would help it prevail. That's okay, I'm grown up about that.
Oh, of course, Dr. Butler's been around the block more than a few times. Dr. Butler,
No,
of course.
actually, I can't ever remember. I can't
Okay.
ever remember making a motion that didn't pass.
Mr. Chairman,
That's a lie.
He said it. So are we at
Mr.
the end
Chairman.
of our evening session, gentlemen?
Mr. Chairman, let me make a point before you decide, if you decide. I've added to the open items list a new category called Reactor Unit 1 Vessel Embrittlement. We have 3 action items on there. One is to review the Capsule B tests, and there are other things like that. So we have that locked in to the open items list.
Right.
So if that helps you make your decision one way or another, that's what we have.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That said, are we done with our evening session, gentlemen? I believe we do, right? It's time for a,
I want to ask about path forward.
Could you turn on your
Tomorrow,
mic?
we're going to talk about, oops, I want to ask about path forward. Tomorrow, we're going to be scheduling fact findings and making sure that we understand what we're doing.
Right.
Do we have any specific recommendations from us about which and at what time and with what content we should schedule fact finding on this to further our understanding?
well, of course, Dr. Butler and you and Dr. Peterson would determine the schedule tomorrow and let the new member accommodate.
Well, I understand that, but let's talk about it now.
We're going to review the open items list tomorrow.
Yeah, but I just want to say, I don't see any particular fact-finding activity that I can understand until we hear something new which we haven't heard yet.
Right.
And after we hear it, which may come in next week, but it might come in next year, I don't know, then we'll evaluate it and decide what to do with it in terms of fact-finding, okay?
But may we consider that, not with an empty stomach now? I mean, can we consider it when the time is right tomorrow, Dr. Butler?
Well, what I just said, I think will prevail because that is in fact the fact. We don't have any basis for any new fact-finding on this.
Mr.
that I can
Chairman?
see.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think the action item is for Dr. McDonald to provide to us his revised data that we can take a look at and to see if it does pass muster in terms of, scrutability.
Yes,
And it's on him to be able to provide that to us. That's the new data that we're waiting for.
yeah, and there's a second half, which has to do with the bolstered argument for the benefits of the testing he recommends, which, although it's laid out in the slides, is very sketchy. Okay?
Okay.
You know what I mean by that? In other words, I read it and I understand it, but to bolster those arguments for the recommended testing would provide us with a very important piece of input.
And just to be clear, the data from Capsule B probably won't be available until 28, 29, something like that. So if that's what we're waiting for to determine whether Unit 1 is safe to operate from an embrittlement standpoint, we have a long wait.